And Elaine, hello and welcome.
Thank you. Good
Great.
to be
Okay,
here.
we're recording.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the Thursday, January 21st, Wilton Board of Education meeting to order. Our first item on the agenda is to review and approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda from the board members?
So moved.
All right, thanks, Gretchen. Is there a second? Thanks, Mandy. All in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, any opposed? All right, we have our agenda. Comments from the public. Lucille usually reads these. Just want to remind everyone that the Board of Ed does not respond directly to public comment during the board meeting, but we listen. We certainly read all the emails, whether they're public comment or not, take them to heart. And some of the items that might come up in public comment will be addressed during the meeting. In addition, Lucille keeps a record of all public comments and attaches it to the minutes once this meeting is over. Are there comments from the public, Lucille?
Yes, I have 6 public comments.
Okay, I just want to remind people that each comment or statement is limited to 2 minutes and then 15 minutes on one topic.
Okay, the first public comment is from Maria Wilcox, 2 Brandon Circle. The current 14-day closure of WHS and 100% virtual learning is unfortunate. I hope we do not take these particular circumstances and turn them into something they are not. An underlying problem and reason why WHS should stay 100% virtual. Let us all remember that WHS operated successfully in a hybrid model for 4 months. The safeguards and procedures put in place by administrators work. WH students are wearing their masks. WH students are following rules and guidelines put in place to keep them safe at school. Let's get back to the hybrid model after this 2-week precautionary closing of WHS. Thank you, Maria Wilcox.
Okay, thank you.
The second statement is from Joseph Mancuso, 2 Apple Tree Lane. My family has 2 7th graders at Middlebrook School. I am writing to implore the Wilton Board of Education to authorize in-person instruction at least 4 days a week immediately. The lack of in-person schooling has been an absolute travesty developmentally, academically, and socially for the children. The kids deserve better. I understand some parents do not want to send their children to school, and that is just fine. They can keep their kids home for remote learning indefinitely. Their election for remote schooling should in no way impact the BOE's decision to offer 4-day-a-week in-person schooling for the remainder of the student population. Kind regards, Joseph Mancuso.
Okay, thank you.
Juliet Craig, 27 Merwin Lane, Wilton. Thank you to all of our school administrators for working so diligently on coming up with a plan to help keep our kids safe at all of our schools. I understand some families are voicing their concerns about Middlebrook returning to the 4-day in-school model, more so now based upon recent incidents and exposures with some Wilton high schoolers. They have a right to vote to their concerns. That's why there is a fully remote option for the schools, correct? There are also many families who are comfortable with the safety measures in place and would like to see their kids in school in person for their reasons as well. Perhaps there's a dip in their kids' learning, or there's anxiety with trying to learn from home, or depression from having little connection or socialization, whatever the reason. Isn't that why we all took a survey to express our choice of learning model for our particular kids? Per the survey, it appears that most families are choosing the 4-day in-school model, and that's their right to choose. Just like those who are concerned about COVID exposure, who have a right to keep their kids at home for remote learning. Obviously, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Thank you, Juliet Craig. Crystal Fogarty, 59 Musket Ridge Road. I would like to go on record with my strong objection to any attempts to make further closures to the school. We applaud the flexible approach taken to this point. Where parents are uncomfortable sending their children to school, they always have the option of remote learning. Any change where remote learning becomes mandatory fails to take into consideration children who need the benefits of in-person learning. Parents who have chosen to place their children in school are fully cognizant of the risks involved. Our neighboring towns continue to take this approach successfully. Our town is already falling behind in so many key metrics. Adding the educational options to our town's shortcomings would only cause further harm to our community. We hope Middlebrook will open to 4 days a week. Best, Crystal Fogarty.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica White, 116 Danbury Road. Based on our current red zone status and the fact that we just began vaccinations, I do not think it is wise to increase the number of contacts in shared airspace by bringing back all students 4 days a week. Please continue to keep health as the priority in your decision making. Please keep the hybrid model not just until our status improves, but when we can maintain progress in Wilton and in our surrounding communities. We also need to allow time for the vaccination process to continue. Thank you, Jessica White.
Thank you.
Brittany Leeton, 565 Danbury Road. I'm writing in regards to Middlebrook's potential return to the 4-day in-person learning model. While I'm severely disappointed in the students and parents at the high school level that are not practicing safe COVID-19 procedures, I do not want this to affect the plan to bring back our middle schoolers. Here are my arguments as to why it is so essential that they return to in-person learning. Community spread has not been traced back to the schools. I applaud all of the guidelines that the schools have put in place. I feel safe sending my kindergartner to school 4 days per week because I know that the school will notify me if my child was in close contact with a presumptive or positive person, and will require a mandatory 14-day quarantine to prevent any community spread. I know that we can be just as successful at the middle school level. To date, the positive cases in our schools have been linked to sports and social gatherings not affiliated with Wilton Public Schools. 6 hours in front of a computer screen is inappropriate for children and greatly affecting my child. He is unfocused on home learning days, spaces out, and then the work that should have been completed during class time becomes homework. Many weekends are spent catching up on work that should have been done at school. His attitude of school is greatly affected, and I fear that this year will completely ruin any intrinsic motivation to learn that he has left. The mental health of our students needs to be taken into consideration. Middle school is a time of change for our children, and many of them are dealing with big emotions or the onset of anxiety. The current pandemic is not helping to make our children feel safe and secure. By allowing them to return to school, we can provide a sense of normalcy in these uncertain times, which will reassure them that they are safe. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in students aged 10 to 24, with 90% of those deaths being traced back to mental illness. We really need to ask ourselves what the long-term impact of these decisions will be on the overall mental health well-being of our children. Keeping them from friends and routine is just damaging. In closing, I am seriously begging that we once again don't allow the selfish acts of the high school students to deter the plans for a return to normalcy for our younger students. Thank you, Brittany Leeton, Danbury Road.
Okay, thank you.
And that's it.
All right, well, thanks to everyone who wrote in for public comment, and thanks to everyone who sent the Board of Ed separate emails. As you know, probably many of you, we will be discussing some of the topics raised on the agenda later. So thank you. Going on to the consent agenda, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Even though it has numerous policies on here, I think we're all aware through reading the attachments that none of these policies have substantively changed. It's mostly a date update. Am I right about that? Whoever's on the policy committee?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Yes.
these are just literally updates.
Just
All right.
making sure that they're still in good standing, and they were, so just new review dates put on them.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
So moved.
Thanks, Ruth. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Glenn. All in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that is approved. Brings us to reports. Superintendent's report.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'll save the bulk of my comments about our learning models for later in the agenda. But we'll note, as has already been stated, we received some profoundly disappointing news this week about our learning models. As you know, managing our schools in this pandemic continues to be a daily struggle. This week underscores that. I will take this opportunity to remind all to consider the choices that they make. We've seen how quickly the virus can spread, and that has real and serious consequences that impact our school operations. I'll come back to the learning models later on in the agenda. I did want to note for everybody, our original calendar had the 2021-2022 budget proposal presentation slated for this evening. In consultation with First Select Woman Vanderslice, we're temporarily delaying that presentation of the budget proposal. The additional time will enable us to hopefully get a clearer picture of the status of state and federal reimbursements and enable us to continue to fine tune the proposal. We'll publish revised dates very shortly. Thanks, Debbie. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Committee reports, teaching and learning. Jen or Mandy?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. Jen, go ahead.
You want me to talk? We did meet. We talked about a few different things. We talked about scheduling at Middlebrook. I don't know if that's on the table tonight to discuss. Just they are working on different revisions, trying to find something that might possibly work. We discussed remote Wednesdays for a little bit, and we had a nice conversation about executive functioning skills, particularly at our transition years. And some of these things, I think people are all aware of, but there's so much on everybody's plates right now that I think we've tabled it for the fall.
And also the survey that Andrea sent out. Andrea, I don't know if you're going to talk about that later, but we discussed that as well.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Operations did not meet.
Right. I think policy did. Ruth or Gretchen? Did policy meet?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we did. We have been making our way through our scheduled review. Some of what we were able to go through and accomplish was put on the consent agenda tonight. And there'll be a few more that we'll be circling back on in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you. All right, that's our committee's financial report.
Great.
Anne or Kevin?
Yeah, Anne's got a financial report, and I'll share my screen so
Thank you, Kevin.
you can all see it. Yeah. Great.
So I'll go through the letter first. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied at the end of the day. So we haven't had much movement since the last report. We're over budget. We're estimating over budgets by 964,214. And as you can imagine, it's related to all COVID expenditures, our custodians, our equipment, PPEs, signage, all the things that we had started at the beginning of the year and now have ongoing with staffing needs. A few things I wanted to touch. Sorry, Kevin, thank you. Salaries, as you'll notice, has the largest amount, which we had 7 additional custodians come on. We had some lunch monitors, and we had a couple of other positions that we needed for social distancing and to make sure that the school is being kept in the correct manner from a cleanliness standpoint. Other than that main one, we have a couple of the equipment, PPEs, And that's been ongoing. It has now stabilized a bit until we see what happens now with Middlebrook and what those schools, if we do reopen, and how they're going, what their needs are going to be. There's various savings that we have. If we froze the budget at the beginning of the year, and we have savings on different line items, as you would expect. Off-site training and conferences, hard copy books, because there's not the need for the program because we've been buying the ebooks, and various things for not being in the building full-time, the different buildings full-time. So that brings us down to the over budget of about 964,000. Well, what I'd like to reiterate on it, that is just our estimate of where we think we're going to be after all the financial decisions and savings that we have put in place. Currently, our year-end expenditures, or our COVID expenditures, by June 30th would be approximately $2.5 million. That would be everything that we're expending. But what we did was, in freezing the budget and various grants that we got and protections we put in place last year, we were able to reduce that overage. So we had about 600,000 from last year. If you remember, we did encumbrances. We went to the Board of Finance. We got things we needed right away. We had, we're estimating about 550,000 in savings in the budget itself for those categories, like I mentioned, training and conferences, busing for the athletic programs, things that just aren't happening right now. So they're savings. And we did get, and I'll go into this now, the grant function, we did get approximately 97,000 for the first 2 quarters of this year. So if I can take a moment, I'll walk you through where we are with the FEMA and state grants, so you have an idea. So FEMA, as I've been saying before, FEMA is covering 75%. The last 2 quarters of last year, we submitted. We got 20,000 on the third quarter, and we're still pending on the second quarter at 75% of the number requested. From the state perspective, the same time period, third and fourth quarter, we got everything that we put in. Now, I want to remind everyone, third and fourth quarter is March 15th through June 30th, 2020. So a lot of our expenditures have not taken place at that point because we were completely remote. And then for the first 2 quarters of this year from the state, because of the timing, the state didn't have enough time for us all to submit our expenditures. They would lose the funds. So they issued the funds based on head count by town and cities. So we got 97,000. Obviously our expenditures were a lot more, but that's what we have to date. Currently we're working on this, the first and second quarter of FEMA. They will be the larger numbers because starting July is when we really started putting the measures in place, buying the PPE, putting the equipment up, putting the barriers up, putting the signage, things like that. So we'll see when we submit to FEMA what that's going to happen. And in recent weeks, just this year, we received notification of a CARES 2 Act, which means there will be some money assigned again down from the state and FEMA. We just don't know what that level is going to be or how they're going to issue it, if it's going to be based on our expenditures again, or how they're going to roll that out. So within the next couple of weeks, we'll know where we stand and what additional money. And on the bottom of this schedule, I put this separately because these were separate grants. The ESSER grant is the Elementary Secondary School Education Relief, and we were assigned 77,000. We do have to give a portion of that to the private schools, which is about 3,000, and that was based on the ESSER grant was assigned by, the state CRF, the next one was assigned by our Title I. So they were looking at what Title I money we get, and based on that is how they gave us. So the state BOE CRF relief fund, we had 2 state grants. We had the one up above, which is the state CRF, and then there's a state BOE CRF. We applied for what we could get under the BOE one, and that you can see the amount is $210,000, and then everything else went up to the regular state one. So we're going to be monitoring this as going along. We hope that we have additional funds that we get in, and if we get those additional funds from whatever agency, FEMA, state, that will reduce our estimated 1 million right now, the 964 overage. So I would open it up for any questions.
So, Anne, can I just ask a question? In a world where we get the grants as requested, what's the delta looking like? It's like a little under 350. Is that where our overages then land?
To be honest, I have no idea what our reimbursement levels will be at. We
Okay.
don't know if they're going to do it as a proration, Title I head count, or if they're going to do it based on our actual expenditures that we have been tracking.
Okay.
So until they roll out their next level, because we just received a letter last week updating that the funds are coming in, we just don't know how they're going to manage it now.
Okay. And have they made any forward-looking statements about what things will look like going forward in terms of how they'll be dispersed, like not knowing how they're going to be dispersed at this moment in time?
There's no clear direction just yet. They're still working everything out. The coverage period the previous coverage period was through December 31st, 2020. They extended that to December 31st, 2021. So it is for the full year. Well, the remainder of this fiscal year and the beginning of the next fiscal year for us. But we're hoping within the next couple of weeks we'll have a clearer picture of what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Right. Well, Anne, thank you for, sort of simplifying it for us. I know there's a lot of detail in there, and I know that we'll be following it more closely at some of our meetings. But that was a great overview, very helpful. And thanks for, again, trying to make sense of all the different grants and the unknowns and the X's in the equation, of which there are many. But I think given our expenses, given the situation, we're in as good a shape as we can be at this point. You've applied for everything possible. You have everything else lined up. So hopefully we can take more shots at that $964,000 deficit. So, and I know that's a topic for future discussions because we will need to bring the Board of Finance in as we look at the year-end balance, potential year-end balance. And it will be a matter of timing. All right, so thank you. That leads us to our review and discuss items. The first one is a happy one, Wilton Reads Program 2021. Kevin, do you want to introduce that?
Absolutely. So I'd like to welcome back Elaine Tyloria, the Executive Director of the Wilton Library.
Yes, hello, and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also want to welcome Fran Kampar. Elaine and Fran and their respective teams worked together for the past couple of years on Wilton Reads programs. So obviously the one last year was disrupted because of the pandemic, but we're forging ahead this year. And so really always thrilled to have the opportunity to work with Elaine and her team on this partnership. It's so enriching for our kids and our families and so many members of the community. So I'll turn it over to Fran and Elaine, and they can take you through the presentation.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for your warm welcome. And thanks again to the Board of Education for, this opportunity to speak with you. As you know, I've often referred to the library's mission because I believe it's a very serious one. And, we say we inform, connect, enrich, and inspire our community. And Wilton Reads, this annual Community Reads program, is one of the ways in which we accomplish that. We've had the privilege of partnering with Wilton Public Schools for this annual initiative, and we certainly look forward to doing it again. So many thanks to Dr. Smith and to Fran for supporting the collaboration between our organizations. As you had mentioned, in 2019, our award-winning collaboration focused on the Holocaust. And last year, the topic was jazz, in a large part to recognize and celebrate our libraries and indeed Wilton's relationship with the great jazz legend Dave Brubeck and his family. Regretfully, because of the pandemic, we were not able to host many of the programs that were planned. However, in the fall, we were able to offer some virtually via Zoom and YouTube Live. Anyway, this evening, I'm here to talk about Wilton Reed's 2021. And the book we've selected is a New York Times bestseller. The title is Memorial Drive, A Daughter's Memoir, nonfiction, by Natasha Trethewey. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner, a former U.S. Poet Laureate, and the author of 5 collections of poetry. The theme, a major theme in the book, is racism. We hope to engage the community in a conversation to explore the issue of racism and race relations. I believe the two topics should be discussed together because one is the problem and the other is the avenue to the solution. We have the opportunity again, through awareness and knowledge, to foster empathy, respect, understanding, and appreciate our common humanity. Sadly, the COVID pandemic, I think, has validated our commonality, our sameness. The human body operates in the same way, and that little microscopic virus has not discriminated. For beneath the veneer of one's appearance, we are indeed the same human beings. Our goal with Wilton Reed's is always to create a broad, multi-layered community dialogue. With Wilton Reed's 2021, we hope to foster, again, a deeper understanding of the blight of racism on society. We will not limit the conversation only to the African American experience. We will also explore other ethnic groups who have been marginalized at different times in our society, including Native American, Asians, Hispanics, and so forth. As in the past, library programs will include our kickoff with a limited book giveaway. Many thanks to Fairfield County Bank for their support on that initiative. We'll also have book discussions, lectures on history, music, a multi-week poetry seminar on Trethewey's poetry, panel discussions, and the availability, of course, of supporting materials in the way of books, as well as videos, documentaries, films. We'll also invite local organizations to join us as community partners in this dialogue. And of course, the finale will be a virtual author visit. Many thanks to the generosity of the Village Market as a sponsor for that. I would also like to note that each year the author selected for Wilton Reed's receives the Groden Family Fine Writers Award. And you can imagine, as a poet, her use of words and language is done beautifully. So again, thank you for the invitation this evening to speak with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any questions. And
Yeah,
if
Elaine,
not-
could
yes,
you
Glenn.
hold the book up again?
Yes,
Let me see.
it's not a very large book. I know, Glenn, you like large books.
Yeah.
So this is not one of the 1,000-page ones, but so it will be a quick read. But I think it's won many awards and been listed in so many top bestseller lists. Excuse me, Washington Post, New York, NPR. I mentioned the New York the Times bestseller already. USA Today, Amazon Best Books. Also, President Obama chose it as one of his favorite books in 2020. So it's gotten quite a bit of notoriety and attention. So I'll turn it over to Fran now to talk about what is being planned for our students. And Fran, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It's my honor to represent Wilton Public Schools in this great collaboration that we are now engaging in our 3rd year. It's a great opportunity for all the members of our community to discuss an important topic based on a common book. The shared reading of one book drives deeper thinking about themes that matter. This year, the topic is very timely. and will provide us with an opportunity for members of our entire school community to have an honest conversation about race, social justice, and equity. This topic is one that our school community has been actively engaged in over the past several years. Most recently, Michael Gordon has worked directly with staff and students as the district's Racial Equity and Inclusion Chair. Michael is part of our Community Reads Task Force and offers an important quote from the Children's Community School that I'd like to offer. Young children notice and think about race. Adults often worry about talking about race, thinking it will encourage racial bias in children. But the opposite is true. Silence about race reinforces racism by letting children draw their own conclusions based on what they see. Teachers and families can play a powerful role in helping children of all ages develop positive attitudes about race and diversity and skills to promote a more just future, but only if we talk about it. In the past few weeks, the Wilton Public Schools Community Reads Task Force has met to select age-appropriate titles. We've narrowed down the choice to a few highly acclaimed titles, although I'll tell you that the task force has had a really hard time narrowing it down as there are so many wonderful books that would be appropriate at every grade level span. Although our plans are not yet final, I wanted to give you a preview of the richness of the books that will be highlighted. My People. This is a picture book for our youngest readers. It's a Coretta Scott King Award-winning photography book based on Langston Hughes' poem, My People. And it celebrates the glory, beauty, and soul of the African-American community. The Undefeated by another renowned writer, Kwame Alexander. Kwame Alexander's powerful ode is a celebration of African-American survival, achievement, creativity, and resilience. It's brimming with references to historical and contemporary people and cultural touchstones. This is an appropriate book for Cider Mill students. Brown Girl Dreaming is also a book in verse. In this book, Jacqueline Woodson shares what it's like to grow up as an African-American in the 1960s and 70s, living with the remnants of Jim Crow and having an awareness of the civil rights movement. This is a middle school reader. Both the final book list and the events will be finalized by our team by early February, and we will be posting all the information on our website. In the past, we featured author visits, read alouds. We've had community members in as guest speakers. We've created documentaries. We've involved our art and music teachers, integrated special events, and integrated it within our curriculum. Our plan is to do the same this year, only all of it will be virtual. I look forward to the collaboration and the community-wide conversation. And with that, thank you. And anybody have any questions?
Any questions or comments? Well, thank you both for presenting tonight. Even though it's 3 years old, I want to say it's a tradition. I'm not sure, at what point we can put that label on it, but it is a great tradition, and it certainly reflects the partnership that the public schools certainly want and have achieved, I hope, with the Wilton Public Library. It's certainly a jewel in this town, so thank you. And again, you've picked a timely theme, and I love the idea of sort of distinguishing the right books for each grade level. That's important. So thank you, and hopefully you'll keep us apprised of the various virtual events. And I know some of as board members, we would certainly like to participate in at least some of those.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, Deborah. Yeah,
Yes.
this is a great, we received a letter several months ago from a number of our students about this topic. And I think this is a great response and a great step toward answering their issues and dealing with the questions they raised. It was a very thoughtful letter, very well written. And I think this is just a great step, for all of us to to take part in.
Well,
Yes, thank you.
again for your support, and we'll look forward to developing a really nice, robust, meaningful slate of programs.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Karen.
Okay, the next item is the learning model update. All right, Kevin, do you want to frame this for us tonight? We have, obviously we're all very concerned, and we just need a way for you to give us some background and frame our conversation.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do that, and I'll try to keep my own remarks brief. So obviously, the persistent high levels of COVID transmission in our community, and then the more recent news about the high school are really profoundly upsetting and disappointing. And I know personally they are for sure, but we need to find a way to forge ahead. And that's what we've been doing all year and we'll continue to do so. So I think in what I'll share with you tonight, I'll start kind of, beginning with Middlebrook, and then we'll set, some of the information about the high school, and I'll share with you some information that Barry shared with the community about that decision. And then, perhaps we can have some conversation about, just how we are going to move forward. But, to begin at the beginning, when we started the school year, the board adopted a set of goals around reopening our schools. The primary goal there was to continue to try and return as many students to in-person learning as possible. We remain absolutely committed to that goal. In making these learning model determinations, we rely on the guidance and the recommendations of our town health director, Barrington Bogle, as well as our medical advisor, Dr. Christine Mackin. In part of my own information gathering process, I read fairly extensively and also participate in weekly phone calls with representatives from the State Department of Public Health. The primary factor when contemplating model change is the COVID-19 transmission in our community and our schools. The very good news we've had is that we've had almost no in-school transmission to date. We know of, we think we had one case back in early December at Miller Driscoll. We thought we might have had another case of in-school transmission at Cider Mill more recently, but it turned out that wasn't conclusive, or there were some other opportunities where the transmission could have occurred, so we couldn't say specifically that it occurred in school. Other than that, there's been no evidence of any kind of in-school transmission. And that's really, really good news. So, despite witnessing the higher levels of spread in the community and around Fairfield County, we have been able to keep our elementary schools in person 4 days a week. I consult with Mr. Bogle and Dr. Mackin weekly on that model, and we look at the factors, and we've been able to keep those schools running on the 4-person in-day model. On January 7th, when the recommendation to return Middlebrook School to a full in-person model was made, there was at the time a reasonable expectation that we would see local transmission rates decline as we moved further away from the holidays. As you're well aware, unfortunately, the transmission rates here in Wilton and around Fairfield County remain fairly high. Consequently, Mr. Bogle has recommended that we remain in hybrid at Middlebrook and defer return to full in-person learning until February 8th. That recommendation, by the way, is separate and apart from what his decision about the high school. I'll come back to the high school in just a minute. So Mr. Bogle's primary focus is reducing the spread of the virus. He absolutely supports our goals to keep schools open and to return more of our students to in-person learning, but is also really concerned about the persistence of high daily new case counts. As of this afternoon, the Connecticut Department of Public Health is recording an average daily new case count for Fairfield County of 61.8. That's down just slightly from a week ago when it was 64.9. That 64.9, by the way, is the highest weekly average that we've seen in Fairfield County since the State Department of Public Health has started to publish COVID transmission rates. For Wilton, the average daily new case count as of this afternoon is 34.2. That's slightly down from last week's high of 36.1. COVID Act Now, which is the other website, as you know, that we track pretty closely, indicates an average daily new case count of 46.6. I checked that just a couple of hours ago. That's also down from 53 earlier today and 67.2 just a few days ago. So we'll see if that turns into a trend, but that's certainly moving in the right direction. And looking at transmission rates in other towns around us, I did note that, although Wilton's numbers are high, comparatively speaking, when we look around all of Fairfield County, ours continue to be some of the lowest numbers in the county. So that's, again, good news and perhaps testament to Mr. Vogel's efforts at trying to mitigate the transmission here in town. So it goes without saying, that the recommendation to delay the return of students to Middlebrook is frustrating. It's frustrating for me too. We've received a lot of feedback from parents and families and others, and we are acutely aware of the importance academically and socially and emotionally of having children in school. And we're acutely aware of the threat of this virus. And so as we move forward and work with Barry and Dr. Mackin to come to decisions, we're trying to balance these out, but we have prioritized health and safety. What else? Oh, just a couple of other points here. Almost nightly, Lynn Vanderslice publishes updates on daily news case counts here in Wilton. And so, those are on her website, and you can see both the year-to-date numbers as well as the daily numbers. In my conversations with Barry, he tracks those very carefully. And so, he's really looking at the nightly counts. And as I mentioned already, is concerned that, we've had a pretty substantial increase and we continue to see an increase. Here in our schools, we also track and we publish a tracker daily, tabulating the number of staff who are currently COVID positive, the number of students, and then the number of folks, both staff and students, who have to quarantine. Right now, we don't have any staff at the high school or middle school who are currently COVID positive. We have one staff member at Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll, respectively. Currently, as of this afternoon, we have 11 students at the high school who are COVID positive, 9 of whom are COVID positive as a result of those gatherings this past weekend. We have no students who are confirmed positive at Middlebrook, 2 at Cider Mill, 1 at Miller Driscoll. In terms of the number of staff who are quarantining, we currently have 2 staff members at the high school who are quarantining, 8 at Cider Mill, 15 at Miller Driscoll. Our present count of students at the high school who are quarantining right now is at 27, but the contact tracing continues, so we expect that number to increase. We have 10 students at Middlebrook who are quarantining, 12 at Cider Mill, 50 right now at Miller Driscoll, for a total of 99 students. So we take all this information, we look at it, and we work with the local health director. Some of the questions that have come up are about, who makes the decisions? Why are the decisions made? Why are the decisions in Wilton perhaps different from decisions in other towns? And, that Connecticut historically relies on local decision-making with specific regard to the pandemic. Through a declaration of public health and civil preparedness emergencies that the governor signed back on March 10th in 2020, he authorized the Commissioner of Public Health to delegate powers to municipal health directors. Consequently, our health director and those in every other municipality wield very broad authority with regard to municipal operations during this COVID-19 pandemic. Here, we've opted and worked, I think, very successfully in a collaborative decision-making process with Mr. Vogel as well as with Chrissy Mackin. But when it comes to health and safety, the health director really does exercise a great deal of authority. And so we have to, bear that in mind as we're putting our plans together. I think, you know, when we look at our relationship with Barry and the work that he does, perhaps compared to, you know, some other health directors in other municipalities, I think to our benefit, he is very hands-on and has taken a very active interest and an active role in concluding what models we should be in and tracking data. He has required us and all of our administrators to put together written plans and then to submit them for approval. When we're proposing a plan change, we have to revise the written plan and submit that, and that results in some conversations and recommendations for him. But you know, that's a process that we follow, and to the best of my understanding, that's not necessarily in place in other municipalities. And so with respect to Barry, he has taken a very active interest and wants to make sure that, you know, we can move kids back to school safely, but we also really are doing it safely to the best extent of our ability. So he's been a strong partner in that regard. Just a couple of other, you know, informational pieces. We're also get questions frequently, and you know, we heard it in one of the comments today. There's a perception that, you know, somehow Wilton is an outlier in the way that we're doing things with respect to our learning models, and in fact, that's not the case. I look at school models across Fairfield County, and I pay particular attention to those communities that are around us. Right now, at the elementary level, Wilton, Westport is in, but they're in half days. Greenwich, Darien, New Canaan, and Norwalk all have it in person. Everybody else, all the other districts around us are in hybrid. At the present moment, the only middle school that I believe in our immediate vicinity that's got students all in is New Canaan. I believe the only other one, you know, that would be kind of just beyond the immediate vicinity is Greenwich. Beyond those two, here in Lower Fairfield County, all other districts have their middle schools in hybrid. And also here in the immediate area, there are no high schools that are all in person. Just about all high schools are in hybrid, with a few in remote learning right now. So that's the kind of the landscape of where we are with the COVID data, where we are, you know, with respect to our learning models compared to others. I want to just take a kind of a final minute to just share a little bit of information about the high school. So Tuesday evening, we began to receive reports of students developing COVID-19 after being at several gatherings over this past weekend. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, as of right now, we have 9 confirmed cases and just over 24 students who were considered close contacts. That number does continue to grow, and we're anticipating it will continue to grow as we continue to contact trace. As Mr. Bogle reported in his letter that he released yesterday, the concerns about the size of the gatherings, as well as the number of students involved, led him to conclude that the high school was at risk of an outbreak. So, you know, in his calculation, the last date of potential exposure was the 19th, when we had students in school. And so he initiated a 14-day closure period beginning yesterday. So we'll, you know, work through that period. We'll continue to monitor numbers, and we expect that we'll welcome students back on the 4th of February. So I'll stop there. I know that's a lot of information, and, you know, perhaps we can open it up to some conversation.
Well, thank you for bringing us up to date. I know things literally change by the hour sometimes. I know perhaps board members have questions and comments, so I'm not sure who wants to start.
Debbie, I'll start.
Okay.
You know, to say I'm disappointed and sad and frustrated is an understatement. I guess I just don't understand who's driving this bus right now. Is it, I guess it's Barry, and it seems like it's such a subjective opinion. You know, the fact that 3 miles away, my kids would be into school full time in New Canaan at middle school since October, and they've had no increased number of cases. And you know, we've been in the pandemic for over a year, and we've learned that closing our schools is not the solution. And I just don't understand, you know, October, the cases were too high to open. November, the cases were too high to open. December, here we are in January, February. At what point are we going to rely on the science that we have and the validation in our own community that there's no transmission in our schools? And it's super frustrating that we're relying on the subjective opinion of someone who is not a medical expert. And I feel like we're getting further and further away from the science and the data and closer into the fear. And it's just, watching the tears, we read every single email, and I hope the public knows that. It's incredibly disheartening and depressing. And I know, Kevin, that you mentioned what other towns are doing and how we're not aligned with other towns, but we're talking 3 miles away. Middle schoolers who've been in school full time since October, who are doing athletics, who I guarantee you are much happier as a general population.
Okay. Other comments? I don't want to weigh in yet, but other comments?
Yeah, I would like to second Mandy's comments. I just guess I'm at a point where I just don't understand. She says 3 miles away, the kids have been in school and we're not. And I don't know that our rate of COVID or whatever it is that much higher, or if it is even higher than theirs. It may not be. I just don't know. And I think, I don't know. I'm really beginning to question. I was fully supportive of being all in terms of protecting the health and everything. But I think we're at a point now where we know that the transmission within the school environment is limited, is low. Why we can't get our middle school kids back in school, I'm frustrated. I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Kevin, and I know there's more people who want to speak, but you can sense, well, you probably already knew it, the frustration and kind of puzzlement on our part. We certainly did set the goal back in the August, to put health and safety as our top priority, which it absolutely has to be. And also the goal of having kids in as much as possible. And, you talked about that we have worked, collaboratively with the Department of Public Health and Dr. Mackin. And I'd like to keep that kind of relationship going. But if we are truly talking about collaboration and partnership, I'm wondering if how to express or how to form some issues and questions that we would like to pose to to Barry Bogle. It'd have to probably be through you, but I think Barry is attuned to the science and the data, but we're looking at it from different lenses. If transmission, how does transmission rate relate to community, what's out in the community? So I'm just thinking that, as we continue our conversation tonight, let's pose some pretty thought-provoking, concerning questions that we have and ask you to translate those to Barry, because I think if this is to be a partnership, what we're doing and what we're trying to do in school is also, important. That is not to dismiss the health and safety, of course, but how can we find the right sort of path forward? So anyway, I'm just going to be quiet and let other people talk. So
Debbie, quick question based on that. Are we still in the 14-day quarantine guidelines? Kevin?
As a community, we are.
So the CDC and the Connecticut state travel guidelines are completely different. Why are we lagging in that as well? In the state of Connecticut, it says, I'm reading right now, the CDC has guidance for 7 days with a negative PCR, 10 days after potential contact. The CT Department of Public Health is using the 7 to 10 day guidance in their travel, and we're in 14 days.
Yeah, that was a decision by the health director to keep us on 14 days.
So at what point can we, and this is nothing against Barry, but at what point, who can override this? Because I just feel like he's making subjective decisions that, again, of course, health and safety is first. We're not aligned with health and safety at this point. Well, we're not even aligned with the state.
Yeah. All right. So let's, I don't want this to become a conflict.
Right.
Rather, if we can try to pose the concerns in a way that will help us partner and better understand where Barry's coming from, so he can understand where we're coming from. You know, I really don't, I'd like to avoid attacking anyone's expertise. His lens is going to be narrowly defined. He's got his credentials and all of that. So I
No,
think
and Debbie, I'm not attacking his expertise. I'm just wondering
Okay.
why we're not aligned with the state guidelines and the
Right,
CDC
okay.
guidelines.
Yeah, and he could, you know, perhaps he could explain more to us than he has before in terms of his rationale. So
Yeah.
let's just try to form it in terms of questions if we all don't mind that.
And I would say just on that point, Mandy, just to be aware, he's not alone at all. You know, he's not an outlier across this state. You know, there are many local health directors. I learned this through, you know, conversations with other superintendents around the state who have opted similarly. So I think to you know, Debbie's point a minute ago, I think you know, what would be, I think, constructive is let's put some questions on paper that's going to help us understand his perspective. And you know, ultimately what we're trying to do is get to a place where, you know, we can have some shared understanding that we're ready to bring more kids back to school. And you know, that's been the point of rub for a while here.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps let's see ourselves on a continuum where Barry is very cautious and we're urging, you know, maybe a different balance in terms of the amount of caution, even though, and I don't mean, maybe it's conservatism is a better way, you know, just in terms of interpretation, his versus kind of what we feel as a district that their mitigation strategies have been working so well. So at some point, the data from in school has, you know, perhaps ought to play a bigger part in his balancing and his thought process. Anyway, I keep talking too much. Ruth or Jen?
That was kind of where my line of questioning was going, that we have had the elementary schools open. We have seen a lack of transmission within the schools. The community spread numbers have still risen, but there hasn't been a call from the health department, the health director, to pull back on that model. And we continue to operate within that model successfully. So my question is, you know, we were kind of greenlit a couple of weeks ago. There was an understanding that numbers would probably subside a bit, and they haven't. But the other schools that are already open are still continuing to be open and can still continuing to be successful. So it seems as though there's a little bit of two different standards. And I'm not quite certain, me personally, from my own research and, you know, tea leaf reading, that our numbers are going to come down. I think that we might be at a new plateau and maybe just be holding here. And if that's the case, and we're holding, and our other schools that are fuller in are still being successful, and we still have all these mitigation strategies in place, perhaps the standard should be that then we are able to go fuller open in Middlebrook, and then monitor whether that model is being successful the way the other schools are, you know, being successful. And if we're still able, despite community spread, to practice our mitigation strategies and to keep transmission within the school at what's functionally zero right now, then that should be perhaps the standard. So I think that I would, you know, perhaps having a discussion around what are the standards? Is there more than one standard? And perhaps giving us some guidelines or some guidance as to, you know, where are we seeing this going? Because we are operating in a world where, you know, numbers have gone up, and every time they go up, they kind of then plateau up. And there is a new strain that seems to be, you know, more transmissible than others. And I would not like to see it get to the point where we keep on having this discussion every 2 weeks and it leads us to the same place and we're not kind of making any other changes that might then also advent more in-person opportunities because we're still looking at a full open.
Okay, Jen,
Yeah.
thanks,
Um,
Ruth. Jen?
Yep. I agree with everything everybody said. I think it's been, sorry, I'm pinging. This has been an incredibly frustrating week, to say the least. I think on everybody's point of view, from parents, from our kids, from faculty, I think we've all been a little perplexed, and at some point you need to jump in and let our middle school have a chance. We don't have any, you gave our numbers, and our numbers, it almost counterbalances everything that we're being told because our numbers look great. And there's never going to be a perfect time. And we go to great lengths to involve our community and ask them for their input. And we have really intelligent people in our community that understand the risks, and they're taking those risks because they trust everything that we've put in place at school. So I think maybe it's time we start as a board regrouping, and kind of what Debbie was talking about, like think of a new group of questions to start asking Barry and kind of get him, not that he doesn't see our perspective, but I think his job is to focus on the health and safety of our entire community based on this virus. And our job is to really focus on our kids. And at this point, it's not the virus that's hurting them. It's the fact that they're still not in school, and that they're still isolated. And now for our high school kids, we've taken sports away, which they just got back. So I think I'll leave it at that. I guess we have a lot to talk about, and maybe Barry comes to a meeting with the board and we can just not attack him, but just ask some questions to maybe help us understand where his thinking is, because it's not aligning with what anybody in our community, take that back, the majority of our community is thinking at this point. And I think it's almost more upsetting to our community to say, hey, we're excited, we finally have a plan, and then to pull it back, even though we all kind of knew that that was a possibility. But are we going to keep doing this? So we have a new date, which is February, which is the week before we now go away for an entire week break. So you're coming back to the same issue. People will travel, people will get together. Now your numbers are going to be high again. So are you going to pull them, or are you not going to put them in at all? And now you're talking about what, March? I mean, at some point, it's the damage to our kids is so much greater than the virus itself, given what our schools are showing, and that we're doing a really great job having them in there. So maybe we can think of some specific questions for Barry and kind of at least understand his thinking, or get him to also think about where we're coming from and our concerns.
Okay, Kevin, have you been taking down questions? Do you want us to reiterate them?
Yeah, I think I've been tracking. And so, I think what I am hearing, primarily, I think is what are going to be, or what is he looking for in terms of indicators that would be a signal to him, to us, that we can move more of our kids back to school. So I think that's one question. I think, the other is, perhaps some more conversation about the difference between, or the import perhaps, between spread within the community and spread within schools, and how that's a factor to the
Kevin, one thing to add too is I would love to have him explain how he benchmarks us on the other towns. We're at 34.2, New Canaan, Darien. New Canaan's at 49.8, Darien 56.5, Greenwich 45.3. We're doing significantly better than other towns. So I would love to know where he's benchmarking us, if not to the other towns.
Mm-hmm.
And also another question is how much more money do we have to spend in our schools to make them safe? we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to have schools open for half the kids. So is it a PPE issue? Is it a plastic? I mean, what else more specifically does he need to see in the school, specifically Middlebrook, from a safety perspective? How can we get it safer?
Yeah, no, actually, Mandy, that last question is a very good one. As you know, our staff at Middlebrook, they had conducted a survey, WA had conducted a survey, and most of the respondents at the time, didn't feel comfortable having more kids return to school. So one of the outcomes of those conversations was to have both Barry and Dr. Mackin visit Middlebrook, which they did last week. And when I spoke to Dr. Mackin had sent some information to Jory, and she was affirming all of the mitigation strategies. Barry likewise took note of all of the mitigation strategies that are in place. When he and I spoke about that today, he was reflecting on one of the classrooms that we visited, and the teachers had mocked up the class so we could all see, what the distance would be between kids in their workstations, what the classroom looks like with all of the sneeze guard barriers up. And, the one flag that he raised was in the very back of that classroom. There were a couple of tables against the wall. They were 6-foot tables, and there was a sneeze guard in between. And I informed him that, we had just purchased another round of desks, and so those would be coming out, and, every student would be back at a desk. So, I took that to mean that he didn't have significant concerns about the environment because of all of the investments we've made. So that's, my hunch is, and I think, we'll just ask the question and get clarity. But, my hunch is, his concern is not so much about the readiness of that school, because the school is ready. It's about the COVID transmission in the community.
So, okay, so it's not the schools, it's not the environment, it's not the transmission in our schools, it's not what other towns are doing, it's what's happening outside of the schools. Just,
I think, yeah.
just to clarify.
Well, that's
ask.
Yeah,
that's what I'm asking. Yeah, no, just to ask him.
Mhm.
Because what's happening outside of our schools is still better than every other town around us. That's why I'm not getting the connection.
Yeah, well, and to your point, Mandy, I agree with that. Wilton is doing, our numbers are doing much better than everyone else around it. And we also have to think that, to some of that extent, it may very well be because of some of these more conservative stances that we're taking. And it's not necessarily, and that doesn't mean that I do believe in our goal to get these kids into as much school as possible. And I am frustrated over the moving goalposts. But I also kind of get a bit wary when we become overly comparative to what other towns are doing or not doing without a full and complete understanding of their data and their situation as well, and how, what the physical infrastructure is of their schools, or their faculty member concerns, or how they are operating. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, fair point. I mean, we can't, no district is exactly like another. And I think every district, from reading different headlines, has had its ups and downs. And while New Canaan Middle School might be open, we also heard from Kevin that others are not open. So, we're on sort of, each town is kind of going through this, on its own and independently. But if I think Mandy's question, might be, I don't know if there are numerical trigger points, from Barry, if that's what he's looking for. Is there a magic number? Is he looking at trends? What happens if trends don't improve? To Ruth's question, if K5's already in 4 days and the outside numbers are what they are, it stops Middlebrook, but it doesn't stop K5, you know, that it seems a little inconsistent to some of us. And if there's, you know, what more can we do? And if the answer is, you know, the plans are good and our data is good, then why doesn't the transmission data, the good data within our protected environments, make more of a difference?
And can I just add one more question for Barry? I just want to know if he's looking at the overall numbers of the town versus the transmission numbers in the schools. Because I think those are different numbers, and I think he needs to consider that as well.
Yeah, thanks for putting it more clearly than I did, Gretchen. But yeah, the data from the schools shows that we have a pretty protected environment, which is wonderful. So why isn't that counting more in his thinking? And again, I hope we're not coming off as trying to usurp his expertise or ignore his expertise or disrespect it, because of course we have to be guided by that, and we will be. And none of us have a medical background or a public health background. But, you know, this is sort of our own questions and questions that we've heard. And, you know, we do have access to reading CDC guidelines and, you know, listening and reading newspapers and all of that. So these are our sincere questions for him. I hope he takes it in that vein.
And Kevin, it would be great to have him join a meeting. And my other question is, would we ever want to look into getting an epidemiologist to give another additional medical question, medical opinion? I know we have Dr. Mackin, and she's great, and she's a pediatrician and she's on the front lines, but I would just be curious to hear more from an epidemiology standpoint as well.
Yeah, we certainly could. You know, as I mentioned, I participate weekly on Tuesday mornings with the State Department of Public Health folks. And I think, you know, the majority of those people on the call are epidemiologists. Matt Carter is a regular attendee, and he's the state epidemiologist. I had reached out some months ago to see if we could get, you know, one of those folks to come and attend a board meeting, and I hadn't been successful. But if that's something the board would be interested in, I can make another attempt and see if, you know, one of those folks would make themselves available. And they would certainly have a, you know, a good overview of what's happening across the state.
Mm-hmm.
And more so just to look at our specific numbers in our specific town, and to give some medical science behind what they think is happening. I think that would be great personally. I don't know about anyone else on the board.
I'm in favor too. I think it would also be a great opportunity for our teachers to ask some questions for those who still have concerns. Be nice to have somebody else for them to bounce ideas and questions off of.
Right. And I hope no one listening is taking this to mean that, because I'm glad it's around the science and the data and the, you know, the information that's out there and the statistics and all of that, that we're not ignoring or downplaying the health and safety, because while many people would like to, and most of us, you know, educationally, of course, would like to see our kids in person, you know, there are concerns about the health and safety, and we're not trying to diminish those. I just want to make, you know, that point, that that's still our highest priority. It's got to be. So.
I think
You know,
it would
and I understand, you know, sort of the feeling of, you know, well, we get so many emails saying this or just a few saying something else, that we want the input, and the surveys that Jory puts out or any other school puts out is to see, you know, how the models would work and what the staffing numbers would be, and all of that. It's a little different than just voting on which you prefer, because that's really not been our stance at any point. It's been keep health and safety as our priority, be guided by the science around COVID to the extent that we know it. And that has got to come and has been coming from our health department. It can come from epidemiologists. It can come from Dr. Mackin, but we've been basing it around science.
I think it would also be helpful if Barry perhaps also understood that that we're also trying to be thoughtful and plan, and, you know, education requires, you know, continuity, and that if there is more to his thinking or his understanding that he could, let us in on, then it would enable us to make, better decisions for, the entire school community, and to not be in this, constant kind of thrust and push and pull and breaks on and breaks off. And
Right, it's the, yeah, it might be the transparency idea, like
Yeah.
what's the rationale, from the public health perspective.
And so that
And if
as we're
we-
going about and planning for the next couple of months, and trying to figure out how best to make sure we can get the most out of the remaining school year, that we have a little bit more of an understanding about kind of where we stand, our decisions stand in relation to some of the public health criteria and his thought process.
Yeah, and Kevin, you prefaced this whole conversation by talking about collaboration and partnership, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're just trying to say, Barry, are you hearing our part of the equation?
Yeah, I wonder if, Kevin, does Barry have access to, or does he see or read any of the letters that come to us from parents who are so frustrated and are so concerned about the mental health, condition and well-being of their children who are not in school? Does that factor into the equation anywhere at all, or is he aware of all those letters that we see and that we receive from parents?
I'm sure he is aware of some, because he's received some from our parents as they've written to express their points of view.
Okay.
And so I do think that he has an understanding of the complexity of the environment. And, to the extent that, we receive those letters, we hear those concerns, we share those concerns. We also see, feedback, that affirms some of the decision making with respect to the hybrid model. And so, I'm sure as he gets emails, he reads them. But I think it's as a trying to ferret out the best way forward, and understanding how you assign weight to these different factors in decision making. It would be helpful for all of us, I think, to understand how he puts that together. And, I will say again, I talk to him, daily. Maria talks to him multiple times a day. So, I'll reiterate for all of you and for everyone who's listening. I can tell you affirmatively, he is as invested as we are in making sure our schools stay open and trying to bring more kids back. And so I think, he carries a really heavy burden in trying to manage all of these different pieces. And, you do have to look at Wilton's numbers. And on one hand, you can reasonably say, hey, our numbers are really good.
Yeah.
Why don't we take the next step? But on the other hand, you look at, the decisions he's made, with respect to perhaps some other decisions in other communities, and, the numbers in other towns don't look so good. And so I do think, as we've talked about in previous meetings, the additive effect of all of these mitigation strategies, both within and outside the schools, have served our entire community really well. And so right now we're managing this tension of trying to take the next step forward in the face of high levels of community spread.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Kevin,
Yeah,
while we're making
and-
a list of questions, can we ask a high school question also?
Yeah, of course.
As they are doing contact tracing and, figuring out numbers and having a better idea as to, how many that possibly could be, are we at all going to maybe rethink our 2-week quarantine once we realize the number and where they're coming from and whatnot, or are we stuck in this 2-week break?
All right. So is there a possibility that the high school could reopen before the 2-week quarantine ends?
Right. I mean, we only had, only our cohort A kids were even in the building. Like our cohort B kids didn't even go. So if they're not part of that group, you know what I mean? Like there has to be.
Yeah, I mean, we had a couple of athletics practices that evening where I suspect the kids were spread out, at least in the part of the practice I saw, but your point's well taken.
Yeah, well, I felt the same way, the Jen did. However, we don't know how many of the cohort B kids who weren't in school were at these gatherings.
Yeah.
You know, which is.
No, I get that, Glenn. That's right. But in terms of how many those kids could have infected the other kids, like we didn't even have a whole group of kids that even went to school this week.
And I think that lends to the importance of contact tracing and just how important it is, you know, in the community and for the community at large to understand that the purpose of it is, you know, to try to arrest the spread of the virus and to provide, you know, a public health service. And it's, you know, like Kevin said in his letter, not meant to be a judgmental process, but to be a confidential, you know, process in the pursuit of arresting the virus and trying to maintain as much public health, and also towards that end, then getting kind of a handle on what's going on, and hopefully then being able to limit the quarantine time for the high school.
Yeah, it was just very disappointing, incredibly so, to hear that he was having difficulty and parents were resisting cooperating to get to the, you know, the contact tracing. I mean, that was just, I couldn't fathom that he was getting pushback, you know, from parents about contacting or understanding or giving information regarding contact tracing. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think, you know, talking to Bob, and he can, you know, speak for himself here, but, you know, he and his team spent a good chunk of yesterday, and I suspect today, participating in that contact tracing. And Bob had shared with me yesterday evening that, you know, the high school team at least experienced a very high degree of cooperation from the folks that they were in touch with. And in speaking with Lynn earlier today, it was her understanding too that, you know, we've been, the cooperation's improved, at least, you know, whoever was interacting with the town contact tracers, that seems to improve too.
Well, that's good to hear.
That's great to hear. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so sounds to me like I've got a set of questions. I'll get in touch with Barry, and I'll debrief this conversation. Maybe I'll encourage him just to watch the video so we can get a sense of what the conversation was. I'll share those questions, and then you know, we can talk about, you know, what's the best way for him to respond to those questions, whether he wants to come to a meeting and interact here in person with us, or work through me. You know, I'm not sure what his schedule is like. I know he's exceptionally busy, but we'll do that. I'll make sure that the question about the high school quarantine is on the list. You know, also, I think just, you know, while we're speaking about it, we can also just talk about the Middlebrook timeline too. And is it the 8th? Is there any opportunity, you know, prior to the 8th?
Exactly, right.
And we'll see, you know, what those answers are. I'll also reach back out to the folks at the state and see if one of those state epidemiologists would make him or herself available, either in this forum and or, you know, with some of our staff who might appreciate that contact as well.
Okay, thank you. I know this is a difficult conversation, but I want to thank everyone for taking part in it and for being upfront and being, you know, asking some hard questions and raising some issues. And I hope everyone understands we are still doing it in the spirit of partnership with the town and our public health director and our district medical advisor. Okay. Any more on the learning model update, Kevin, or can we, should we move on at this point?
I sure would like to move on.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. We go to Miller Driscoll project. There is a blast from the past. Kevin or Ann, are you taking us through that?
Ann shall.
Or Glenn, you were on the committee. Mandy, I think you were on the committee.
That's right.
Gretchen, I think you were on the committee. So you all can take over.
It's a formality. What we're doing right now is closing out the project from the financial side with the state. And as you know, the state was paying about 21% towards the expenditures. So we have to close it out to be able to get the last reimbursement. So the first step, the state has 6-7 steps that they require. The first one is that the Board of Ed has to officially close the project, and they have to vote to say that the project is closed and done. So I have those minutes on record before I can move to the next level with the state. So as you know, it's obviously done because we've been up and running for 3-4 years in the school. So I'd be looking for the board to take a vote to close the project down, so I can get the minutes to start the process.
Great. So, and this is on as a review and discuss. So for the next.
Okay, so for the next one, we have time. We have time because I'm still doing some other stuff. I'm just trying to hit all the points, and the first one was that. So that's
Well,
fine.
is there a reason we couldn't vote tonight to close the project if I make the motion to do so? I mean, I know it's for you and discuss, but you know.
Yeah.
It can
Let me
wait, Glenn,
just jump in. If we don't have to, let's not, because
Okay.
this is so legally important that if we don't do this completely correctly, I don't want to mess it up.
we can wait because I have other things that are being worked on currently as well. So,
Yeah.
So as long as it doesn't hurt us.
As well.
Okay.
so the next meeting is good if it can get on for a vote then.
Great. And,
Yeah,
and are there other steps that the board needs to be aware of? So it's formally closing the project, and then is it just, paperwork after that?
It's all paperwork after that. I have to do things with the construction manager, the architect, pull numbers together, reconcile things out, get it to the state to then turn around for them to audit everything, the whole project.
Okay. All right. So we'll get the wording of the motion. We'll put that on the next agenda as an action item.
Thank you.
Okay. Action items, there aren't any on tonight's agenda. Kevin, you've already explained that the budget presentation and therefore the budget workshops will be rescheduled to a slightly later date. And then we have our next meeting calendared there. And of course, we stand at the ready for special meetings or additional meetings, depending on our situation. That brings us to comments from the public.
Yes, we did get another one.
Okay.
Noah Litton, he did not include his address. With a much more virulent strain of COVID now circulating, we need to consider new measures to adopt at Middlebrook, especially if we are going to be deviating from the current hybrid model. In the UK, where this new strain of the virus has been circulating for a longer period of time than here, the virus is being spread in the schools. Children are asymptomatic and bringing the virus back to their families. So if we are going to attempt 4 days in person for Middlebrook, I would suggest we consider two things. One, begin in-school COVID spit testing. Group the students by homeroom and test them before they enter the school. Have all students spit into a bag. Test the bag on site. If there is virus found in the bag, test every child individually. 2, desks to remain 6 feet apart. If we move the desks to only 3 feet apart, the chance of spreading increases, especially with more contagious strain. If we have no choice but to move to desks 3 feet apart, I would suggest that we do it now during the hybrid phase of learning. Let's see what happens with a smaller number of students but space closer together. If the transmission rate within the school does not spike, then you can make a case for a full classroom. Thank you for your consideration. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Deborah, question. Yeah, I'm looking on the agenda. It has our next meeting as Thursday the 4th, and then a meeting on Thursday the 11th of February. Are we meeting back to back?
Right. That may get redone. Those were, I think the back-to-back part had to do with the budget, the original budget
Right.
timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if that changes, we
Okay.
may change those meeting dates. You are
Okay.
right.
Yeah, but
But
the
we
next one is,
also,
okay.
yeah, on the other hand, with everything going on, we may need it. Or if the budget gets unrolled, that may be the date. So there's some reasons to still keep it there as a tentative.
Okay, great, no problem.
All right, thanks for the question.
Kevin, I just had one quick question we've had the question a lot. Are you even considering canceling February break? Can we just get that out there and hear your response?
At this point, I am not considering canceling February break.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our agenda. So this meeting is adjourned at 8:33. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Talk to you
Bye.
soon.
Bye,
Good
guys.
night.
Good night.